Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you all so much for being with us this afternoon to discuss this very important topic. Thank you so much to Demand Justice and a Just Majority and all of the organizers here in Westchester, across New York State, and around the country who are demanding and fighting for justice on this particular issue, but on every issue. It is my honor to be standing here with Congressman Mondaire Jones, who was leading the fight as a freshman in Congress towards democracy reform. As we saw on January 6, 2021, our democracy is literally under attack. And one of the reasons why it continues to be under attack is because so many of the provisions and so many aspects of the infrastructure that were put in place many years ago are now obsolete. It's time for our democracy to evolve in the House, in the Senate, and definitely as it relates to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court has become hyper-partisan and are now making decisions that is literally robbing the rights that people have fought and died for away from people in our country. The Dobbs decision, taking away a woman's reproductive rights, and a less talked about decision that deals with concealed carry permits in our states. Guns are the #1 killer of children in our country. #1. And we are not only talking about mass shootings. That is a major part of it. We still have the persistent issue of gun trafficking in our country. The vast majority of gun crimes that happen in New York State happen with guns that come from outside of the state. We know where those guns are coming from. Most of the states are led by Republican leadership. States like Georgia, Virginia, Pennsylvania, South Carolina, North Carolina. That's where our guns are coming from. And we know this because we actually track the data to see where they're coming from. But one of the other aspects of democracy reform involves the DOJ actually enforcing the law and holding gun dealers and the traffickers accountable, because we know who they are. So this fight is essential. This fight is urgent. This fight is necessary. And this is a fight that we are going to win. And the way we are going to win it is to make sure we vote the right people into office and vote the wrong people out of office. That includes the House of Representatives, but that also includes the U.S. Senate. And I've been saying this every time I've spoken this year. There are 33 Senate seats up for grabs. And I don't care what Cook and other polls are telling us. Another problem in our democracy is low voter turnout. And I guarantee you, if we increase turnout in a place like Florida and are very strategic in very specific counties, we could get someone like Rick Scott out of office. And that is how we need to be thinking. Globally, strategically, with a precision-like focus on how to get this done. Because right now, members of Congress do not have the vision or courage to do what's necessary to revise the Supreme Court. They don't. They are holding on to a status quo that benefits a small percentage of Americans, very, very, very small. And we know who they are. But leaves the rest of us just trying to understand what the hell is happening to us in this democracy on a day-to-day basis. And I'll close with this before I pass it to Congressman Jones. The American people have lost faith in our government. They've lost faith in our democracy. They've lost faith in the people that they elect. And that's why so many stay home. It's time to get the right people into office at every level of government so that people can have faith again. Once people have faith, they will engage, and we can have the revisions that we need in our democracy. So thank you all again for being here. It is now my honor to pass the podium to Congressman Mondaire Jones.
It's always really difficult to go after Jamaal Bowman, Congressman Jamaal Bowman from the great 16th Congressional District here in White Plains. I want to wish you all a good afternoon, and I'm really sorry that the weather is what it is outside. I had hoped that we would do this on the streets, as so many other things are happening out there. We're here because the far-right 6-3 supermajority on the Supreme Court is on a rampage against our basic freedoms. Not only the right of women to have their own health care decisions made between themselves and their physicians, but also the freedom not to be gunned down, whether it is in a synagogue or a church or at a grocery store like upstate in Buffalo or in an elementary school like right here in the Hudson Valley. And I was just 11 years old when Columbine happened. And even then, as horrified as I was, I never imagined that something like that would become the norm. But since Columbine happened in 1999, more than 349,000 children have experienced gun violence in their schools. So far this year, there have been 163 mass shootings in the United States, and we know that nearly every day that number increases. In 2021, we saw the highest total of gun deaths in America on record. And here in New York, in an average year, 870 people die from gun violence, and 2,607 people are wounded. But the supermajority of far-right justices on the Supreme Court does not care. As Republicans in Congress refuse to support common-sense gun reforms, like universal background checks and an assault weapons ban, the Supreme Court has meanwhile been making it easier to obtain guns and to cause harm to other people. In June of last year, we know that the Supreme Court decided the case called Dobbs, which overturned the 50-year-old constitutional right to an abortion in this country. But as you just heard the congressman mention, there was also another decision that did not get nearly as much attention. The Supreme Court, in a decision called New York State Rifle and Pistol Association v. Bruin, overturned a 100-year New York State law that imposed common sense restrictions when it came to concealed carry of firearms. You know, the reason that New York has the 48th highest rate of gun violence in the United States of the 50 states is because of the strength of our gun laws. But now, as a result of decisions like Bruin, New Yorkers are less safe. 2 years ago, on April 15, 2021, Representatives Hank Johnson and Jerry Nadler of New York and I introduced what's called the Judiciary Act, a bill to add 4 seats to the Supreme Court of the United States and to restore sanity and integrity to that institution. And I was proud to be joined by Congressman Jamaal Bowman, who was an early and enthusiastic co-sponsor of that legislation, because as you can see, he understands what is at stake. And since then, I'm proud to say that our movement to expand the court has grown. You know, when we first introduced that legislation, some people thought we were out of our minds. Remember, this was before the decision to overturn Roe v. Wade and the Bruin decision and so many other things, including, frankly, things that have not yet happened, but that will happen in June of this year. But now confidence in the Supreme Court is at an all-time low. And according to a poll done in September of last year, a majority of Americans now support adding seats to the Supreme Court. That poll was done by Marquette Law School, for those of you who are interested. Expanding the court isn't about Republicans versus Democrats. It's about protecting our way of life here in America. It's about protecting freedoms like abortion and the right to vote, as fundamental as that is. And it's also about keeping New Yorkers safe from being gunned down. in the places that I mentioned earlier, and really anywhere. To those who are anxious about Supreme Court expansion, we say we cannot afford to do nothing. And the fact is, over the last decade, we saw Republicans change the size of the Supreme Court when they left a vacancy open after the death of Antonin Scalia for 14 months, inventing a non-existent rule that they went back on when they rushed through the confirmation of Amy Coney Barrett as a presidential election was underway and millions of votes had already been cast. I thank God that Supreme Court expansion is not a novel idea. In fact, by statute, Congress has changed the size of the court 7 times before in our nation's history. The 6 far-right justices on the Supreme Court have become an extension of the MAGA Republican movement in this country. Those unpopular policies that they are unable to impose through legislation, they turn to people like Justices Sam Alito and Clarence Thomas to legislate from the bench. And speaking of Justices Alito and Thomas, their blatant disregard for ethics and even for laws concerning the disclosure of gifts has highlighted the corrupt, unaccountable nature of the Supreme Court and the need for Congress to impose a binding code of ethics. There is no binding code of ethics that exists right now with respect to Supreme Court justices. That is a travesty, and I think most Americans understand that to be absurd. Whether it is leaking the court's opinion in Hobby Lobby to wealthy conservative activists, like the New York Times has described allegations of recently with respect to Justice Alito, or violating the law by failing to report millions of dollars in gifts and other financial transactions, including the wealthy conservative activist donor Harlan Crow, which Clarence Thomas is guilty of, no wonder the court is facing a crisis of legitimacy. Nothing except restoring balance and integrity to the Supreme Court will stop the all-out assault on fundamental rights and the declining legitimacy at the court from getting worse. And history is going to record how we respond in this moment, how Congress responds in this moment, and how people of good conscience understand what is at stake now and, of course, in the 2024 elections, and how we respond to that. And hopefully that will involve taking these threats seriously and passing legislation at the federal level to fix these problems. I am so proud to be joined by incredible leaders in America, frankly, today, and I'm proud to introduce my friend and someone who is a dad, a leader in the movement to end gun violence in this country, an activist, and also the author of a forthcoming book, my friend Fred Guttenberg, to speak next at the podium. Thanks so much.
Thank you, and man, I hope we see you back in Congress soon. My name is Fred Guttenberg. I'm a dad of Jesse and Jaime. Just before coming here today, right after landing, I made the first phone call that I always make after landing, and I called my son Jesse. And we spoke about hockey, the Panthers-Bruins game tonight, why the Panthers are going to win. We did a father-son conversation. Yesterday, I visited Jaime at the cemetery because that's where my daughter lives. My daughter was killed in the Parkland school shooting. The thing is, my son was there too. I was on the phone with my son while the shooting was still happening, and we heard the shots on the 3rd floor that were killing his sister. Gun violence in America is real. If you just indulge me for a minute and look at it over the past 20 years, and I use 20 years intentionally because my daughter should be 20 this July. In the past 20 years, we've gone from 200 million weapons to over 400 million. We've more than doubled the number of guns in America. 20 years ago, AR-15s were less than 2% of all guns sold. Now they're 25%. People always say, I don't understand what's happening, why there's this issue with gun violence in America. Those two things are all you need to know to understand it. The question is, how did we get here? For far too long, we've had too many elected leaders and now a Supreme Court who have listened to the lies and myths that drive gun violence in America. Now, I'm going to give you one myth only for today because it really relates to the Supreme Court. The one myth is America has always been like this. That's a lie. America has a history of gun safety at its core. We've always passed gun safety measures to reflect the times that we were in. One of the laws that was passed over 100 years ago was the Bruin Law. It was a law in America. It stood for a long time. It was one of the reasons why New York per capita is one of the safest states when it comes to gun violence prevention that there is in America. The Supreme Court just overturned it. Now, I want to remind you all, almost 5 years ago, not long after my daughter was killed, I was at the confirmation hearing for Justice Kavanaugh. I was there as a guest of Senator Dianne Feinstein. And while there, and while talking to Senator Blumenthal, it was brought to my attention that Justice Kavanaugh was standing right behind me. And so I turned around, and I tried to introduce myself to him. And I introduced myself to him the way I introduced myself to everybody. And I said, "Hi, my name is Fred Guttenberg, father of Jaime Guttenberg, who was murdered in Parkland, Florida." And as soon as I got to the murdered in Parkland, Florida, you may all remember this, he pulled his arm back and he ran. He didn't want to hear from me. So I want to tell you now what I wanted to tell him then. And it's really quite simple. What I wanted to tell him is he was a father of some beautiful daughters around the same age as my daughter. And what I wanted him to know is that while I knew he had been influenced by money from special interests, including the gun lobby, my hope for him, this is going back 5 years, was going to be that he would think about my daughter and his daughters and put them at least on an equal pedestal with the lobby that I was worried he was already beholden to. He didn't. We already saw that happen. You see, the reality of this money that has flowed through to these Supreme Court justices is now becoming clear. We are seeing it with breaking news story after breaking news story over just the past few weeks. But these justices are being influenced by these special interests, and it is to our detriment. The truth is, there's a reason why guns in America doubled in just 20 years. And it is because of the special interests who had a motive. And their motive is, the more we believe America is a violent place, the more guns get sold. America is no more violent than any other country, but our access to guns is different. And that's why we now have more children dying because of guns than any other means. I stand here with you today. I came here from Florida to be here today because the Supreme Court matters to me deeply. While we see states doing really important things in the interest of safety, we also see the Supreme Court stepping in and trying to go in another direction, and we can't have it. So I will end here. To any American voter, in 2024, you cannot sit home. Do not say, "I don't love that candidate. He's not the perfect candidate. She's not the perfect candidate," because it's still the candidate who will defend your right to be free from gun violence, who will defend your right to choose, who will defend your rights to vote, okay, who will stand up for democracy. So even if not your favorite choice, the perfect choice, you must get out and vote. Democracy depends on it. the Supreme Court depends on it. Thank you so much. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to my friend, Dr. Chethan Sathya. Buddy, come on over.
Let me just start by saying, and I'll keep this short. It's an honor to be here with all of you. Fred, you are the reason that, we're here today. If anybody didn't hear what Fred said, please put yourself in that position. I come at this from a very apolitical lane. I'm a pediatric trauma surgeon, and unfortunately, I have to treat the kids that are getting injured by these bullet wounds. Throughout my career, I've treated 6-month-old babies with bullet wounds. Even here in New York, at our level 1 trauma children's hospital, just 5 or 6 miles from here, we've had a 400% increase in the number of kids coming in with bullet wounds just last year. So we are seeing this on the front lines. And I can tell you that I've treated kids who have been shot while sitting in a car seat, treated kids, recently one boy who accidentally shot his brother in the back of the head playing with a dad's gun. I've treated kids with failed suicide attempts. And I've treated kids that are involved in gang violence and have no other choice but to get shot over and over again. These are all different types of gun violence, right? Whether you're talking about firearm suicide, mass shootings, unintentional injuries, or violence, they each have different policies that can prevent them. And I think as a country, we need to stop lumping them all together and polarizing this issue. Of all the patients and families that I treat, you have to imagine, right? They're from all aspects of the political aisle, right, left. But I've not met one that doesn't care about responsible gun ownership, firearm safety, safer communities, and no mass shootings. And so it is possible to have a nuanced discussion on this topic. And I really do come at this as a public health expert. I do not view this as a Second Amendment issue. I'm actually originally from Canada. There's a high rate of gun ownership there. Simple public health measures can save lives, and that's the way we need to start considering this. Who argues now with the fact that seatbelts are in cars, right? You want the safest car. Who argues with the fact that there are age limits on selling tobacco? Who argues with us going after the opioid industry with respect to their marketing practices? And how many parents out there are concerned about the fentanyl epidemic? We can do the same thing with the gun industry from an apolitical lane, very much focused on public health, because we need proper policies in order to keep the public safe and to promote everything that all Americans really want at the end of the day, the majority. And so I come at this, again, not from a political lens, but simply from a public health policy lens. My concern with the current SCOTUS is that we are unable to actually implement and act on policies that we know can save lives in the interest of public health. And so it's really an honor to be here today. I'm going to hand it back over to Representative Bowman. Thank you.
Once again, thank you all for being here. We'll now take a few questions. Let's get it done. I mean, that's the bottom line. I think some of my colleagues don't recognize the urgency of the matter, and too many of my colleagues have acquiesced over their power to corporate interests, certain lobbies, and maintaining, again, a status quo that's been in place for quite some time. I'm not a career politician. I'm an educator, so I come at this from an educator's perspective. And for me, the bottom line is we have to, first and foremost, safeguard the general welfare of everyone and the well-being of our nation, and that means keeping people alive and making decisions that will lead to that. And expanding the Supreme Court is one of those decisions. There are many others, but that is one essential one. And I'm so happy that Representative Jones mentioned how public opinion and perception on this matter has changed dramatically, and he was visionary in his policy when he wrote it prior to the reversal of women's right to choose and the concealed carry decision. So it's time to get it done, and it's time to act with a sense of urgency. Yes. I'll let Representative Jones respond as well, but for me, it's not a concern because the Supreme Court hasn't expanded in quite some time. And it can't even effectively do its job right now because it doesn't have the capacity to hear all the cases that come before it. So because our population has grown and our democracy continues to evolve, it should expand simply for that reason, just so it can operate effectively and efficiently. So now it's time to have that conversation. Now it's time to have a conversation about the filibuster, about the Electoral College, and about so many other areas of our democracy that were designed in a time that was much different than right now.
You know, it's a common question, and often it's asked in good faith. And, you know, I liken it to a house being on fire. Do you say we're not going to put the fire out because at some point in some indeterminate future, someone else may light a match and the house might be on fire all over again? I mean, we have to appreciate that what is happening right now doesn't require any, for Republicans, doesn't require any tinkering with the size of the Supreme Court. They've already taken away the fundamental freedom to have an abortion. They've already gutted the Voting Rights Act, which was how we got our multiracial democracy in 1965 to begin with. They are coming for LGBTQ plus rights in June of this year. And affirmative action and so many other things that people had just taken for granted as constitutionally secure. So what I would submit is that Republicans who have taken control, unfortunately, of the Supreme Court of the United States have all of the votes they need to do as much damage as they want. And the only way to stop it is to restore some balance and some sanity by adding seats to the court. Well, people have different views on that. The Judiciary Act would add 4 seats to the court, and it would be 13 from 9.
And lifetime appointments.
Fred, did you want to say?
Yeah, I actually want to respond
I think Fred wanted to.
to the original. Yeah. You know, I always told my kids, I don't do what if, I do what is, and here's why. Since my daughter was killed, I've heard it said far too often, a line that you all recognize. We can't pass gun safety laws because you pass one, there's going to be another. It's the slippery slope. And that whole argument was used to literally stop gun safety laws for far too many years. However, at the same time, those people using that line and saying it were busy passing busy passing gun laws across the country. Things like stand your ground, things like permitless carry. So they were saying you can't do it while they were doing it. And so those who use the argument that you shouldn't expand the court because it may happen again down the road, okay, you do what the time demands. And right now, the time demands we expand this court. We have seen it because of the way the court has behaved. We have seen it because of the financial concerns that are happening as we literally are speaking. The news stories keep breaking. The time demands we expand this court. Full stop. Thank you.
I would also add, consider the messenger in terms of who those critiques are coming from. Those critiques are often coming from people who are pro-gun, pro-corporation, pro-wealth inequality, pro-redlining, anti-black, anti-gay, anti-woman, anti-dealing with the issue of poverty and all of the other issues in our society. Consider the messengers there. Those people are usually part of a power dynamic that want to maintain a status quo that benefits them and doesn't benefit the entire nation. Take one or two others. yes, thorough investigation, and if it comes to that point, impeachment, I think Clarence Thomas, there's enough evidence right now, and I think one other, there's probably enough evidence right now, but definitely a thorough investigation. Investigate, did they lie to the Senate as they were going through their proceedings before they even got in, as well as, gifts and other things like that. It's just, in my remarks, I said that the American people have lost faith in their government. This is a clear example of that. Thank you all. Thank you so much for coming. Appreciate it. Thank you all. Yes.